Well, we're at war with the Islamic State. We built a global coalition to degrade and ultimately destroy them, and that is certainly our goal, and that will be done by the combination of efforts. It's military, diplomatic, economic, political, but we really welcome, as President Obama said last night, the historic vote in the UK Parliament to begin airstrikes in Syria. We welcome the strikes that occurred last night at the Omar oil facility in Deir ez-Zor in Syria. This is a critical facility in which Daesh is able to fund its operations. So we're encouraged, but this will be a long campaign. It's going to take time, but we are intensifying our efforts across the board, and we're looking for all of our coalition partners to do the same.
There's obviously been a huge debate here about those airstrikes. Can we put them in some context? Is Britain's involvement now decisive? Does it make the difference between winning or losing?
Well, it's hard to say anything is going to be decisive in this campaign. This is going to be a long-term effort. But pressuring them in Syria is critical, and what the capabilities the UK can bring is both precision guided munitions with their brimstone munitions, making sure that we are very careful to avoid civilian casualties, and pressuring these networks across the board. The more strike assets we have in the sky at any given time, the more targets we are able to hit. We now have more intelligence on Daesh than we did even 3 or 4 months ago. And we don't want to leave any targets left alone because we don't have planes in the sky. So this is a very important decision. It's going to dramatically increase our effectiveness and allow us to really intensify the pressure campaign in Syria.
Can you then lay out what the military steps are now that you're bombing? You've also got special forces going in on the ground. Can you lay out what's supposed to happen?
Well, we have a number of things going on at the same time. We're doing things now that we could not have done, again, even just a few months ago. It takes time to set up the foundation to do these things. We're focused on critical areas all across the battle space in Syria and Iraq. There's a 98-kilometer strip of border that Daesh still controls with Turkey. We're working with Turkey to close that border, and we're working with Syrian opposition forces to pressure Daesh in that critical area. To the east in Syria, we're working with a coalition of Syrian Kurds and Syrian Arabs to begin to push down on Raqqa and cut off the critical road linkages between Iraq and Syria. That is ongoing, and they've had some real success retaking the town of Al-Hal and now pushing down south to retake some more territory. Our special forces, the advisors that will be going into Syria, will be helping to advise and assist in that efforts and others. Across the border in across the border in Iraq, we're now cutting off the main road networks between Mosul and Raqqa. The operation to retake Sinjar was critical to that. If you then go around to the Tigris River Valley, Iraqi forces are pushing up the Tigris Valley, beginning to impinge upon ISIL strongholds. They retook Beji, they retook and have now secured the Beji oil refinery. If you go to the eastern Euphrates Valley, just west of Baghdad, we now have Iraqi security forces surrounding and now moving in to Ramadi, the iconic city of Ramadi. And Daesh is now taking civilian human shields into the center of the city to try to resist that attack. We are being very careful, very deliberate, but we now have Daesh surrounded in the city of Ramadi. So all of these simultaneous pressure points ongoing at the same time, we're at a point in this campaign that we're moving it now to a new stage and a new phase. And getting the UK in the skies with the coalition over Syria will help us dramatically increase that pressure. And the strikes they did last night are focused on the oil infrastructure to make sure that we're not only pressuring them on the ground, pressuring their leaders, making their fighters think twice, but also taking away their economic lifelines.
Do you agree that there are 70,000 moderate forces in Syria ready to fight now?
Well, there are about 70,000 moderate opposition forces. They are, of course, fighting on multiple fronts, and many of them right now are focused on the conflict with the regime.
So you'd
which is
agree?
why it is so important to get to a ceasefire against the regime, to try to focus our efforts on the threats, and most importantly, the threat of Daesh.
So you would agree that that 70,000 is not a single coherent army in any stretch of the imagination?
Well, to bring coherence to the fight in Syria against Daesh, we have to advance the diplomatic political process, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
And how do you bring them together through diplomacy if none of the rebel groups are taking part in the talks?
Well, in fact, in Saudi Arabia, in about a week from now, there's going to be a very broad opposition conference, which will include a number of armed groups with dramatic capacity on the ground, and this is part of the Vienna process. Everybody recognizes it cannot all be done externally. You have to bring the internal players to the table. And the process that is now getting underway in Saudi Arabia is designed to answer your very question.
Just finally, a couple of months ago, General Austin said that the $500 million effort to train Syrian forces had only resulted in 4 or 5 Syrian rebels being trained. How many more have you trained since?
Well, that effort is ongoing. What we're really focused on is making sure that we are supplying the forces that are in Syria now fighting Daesh. And in fact, if you take a map and just go north of Aleppo, there's a town called Mara. And then you can draw a line. We call it the Mari line. Daesh has tried to push west for some time. They've now reached really the extent of their western advance, because we've halted them. That took some time, and now we're beginning to roll them back. So some of these forces that we have trained have been involved in operations to retake some villages across the Mara line, and that's something that we are going to continue. That's what I mentioned at the beginning of the interview here, this 98-kilometer strip of border with Turkey. Look, make no mistake, this is extremely, extremely difficult. We are not putting U.S. combat troops on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Nobody wants to return to those days. We are putting advisors and special forces in, but we are relying on indigenous forces to take the fight to Daesh. And so that's difficult. It takes time to organize the forces. It takes time to build the relationships you need. But we have some more traction now, and you're going to see intensification across the board. But again, it's not going to be a linear process. It's not going to be a perfect process. But we have to pressure them across this battle space, because then they start to do stupid things. They travel around in groups, they come out of hiding, and we can kill the leaders, such as we did with Jihadi John in Raqqa only a couple weeks ago.
Mr. McGurk, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks.
Thank you. Honored to be here.